Hi, and welcome to Mission Forward. I'm Carrie Fox. For more than 25 years, I have worked alongside nonprofit and foundation leaders who do the essential work of holding communities together, often in moments of deep uncertainty. And they, like you, are being the leaders we need. But what happens when the moment needs more than we might have? Well, that's why this season, we are going behind the scenes of our brand new 2026 Insights on Purpose report. It's research that takes the pulse of hundreds of nonprofit and foundation executives nationwide and asks a simple but profound question. How ready do you feel for what's ahead? What we found in that research was striking. Leaders are under historic pressure, and yet many still feel very confident about the future. And that tension between concern and confidence and how to lead through that feeling, well, that's the space we are exploring all season long. And today, we are talking with one of the leaders who is modeling how to lead through change so effectively. Tanir Ami is the CEO of CareStar Foundation, a California-based foundation that is helping to reimagine emergency and pre-hospital care in California in service of racial justice. In fact, their recently released strategic plan makes their purpose crystal clear: to eliminate racial disparities in emergency medical services care across California. Now, over the past year, Tanir has led her board through an intensive and very intentional strategic planning process that explored many of the questions that feel close to home for many of you these days. What does our community need from us right now? What kind of impact do we want to have? And what will it take to look back years from now and say without a doubt that we changed something meaningful? Today, we're going to learn more about how she navigated that process with her team, how she held both the need for clarity in time of uncertainty, and how this new strategy is a perfect example of an organization living through its values. Tanir, welcome to Mission Forward.
Thank you so much for having me, Carrie.
So give us a little more grounding. Tell us a bit more about CareStar Foundation, maybe why it came to be and what your focus is today.
Absolutely. So the CareStar Foundation was funded by the sale of an air ambulance company in the state of California called CalStar. CalStar existed for well over 30 years. It was a small nonprofit organization run by a consortia of Bay Area hospitals. They got together and they decided that it would make a lot of sense for them to have their own air ambulance service company that they shared. And they did that really nicely and well together for, again, 35 years. And back in 2017, after many discussions, they decided that it was time to sell the company. It was no longer financially viable the way that it had been in earlier years. And they felt like someone else could do just as good a job running it with the care that they put into it. And so they sold it to a for-profit company called Reach, also known as AMR or GMR, depending on how you know them. And the proceeds of that sale is $65 million that they paid for the fleet of ambulances and the name and the staff, became what is now in our bank account and what we were told to do when we first founded the organization, which was honor the legacy of the CalStar organization. And CalStar provided really exceptional services in the pre-hospital care arena. And so that's where we focused, and we tightened our lens on the work and the amazing services that are provided in EMS and pre-hospital care. And that's what we've continued to do.
So, in full disclosure, I've had the great opportunity to work with you and your organization. And what I found so enlightening in getting into this work is some of the data that sheds light on the situation that you seek to address. And I'm curious if you can just paint a little more of the picture of why racial justice, racial disparities, why that work is so critical to your mission.
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that is not entirely not fully integrated yet in the field of EMS and pre-hospital care. There are so many people that are working on improving clinical quality in the pre-hospital care sphere. And racial equity was something that we wanted to also elevate and draw attention to. As we know better in other fields, particularly primary care, where also had a lot of experience, and in hospital care, we know that when we dig into disaggregated data, we do see differences in treatment and outcomes for different racial and ethnic groups, populations. And so we wanted to bring that lens also to the pre-hospital care arena, where some of those conversations are definitely happening and also still in their infancy.
The work that you work on is mission critical. It is life-saving, it's transformational, all of those critical work as we think about people who are in public health and advancing missions like yours. I'm curious how leading this work today feels in comparison to what it felt like in 2020.
It does. It's a really, really great question. One that I hadn't really reflected on, even though I could have sort of emotionally responded to that question. It was really gave me an opportunity to reflect on this. I think there are some big differences. I think in 2020, with the onset of COVID, my recollection of that, the energy and sort of the what was happening there, particularly from a leadership perspective, is that we were so quick and bold in our responses at that time. I think maybe the way that I would sort of name the difference between 2020 and today is that, sort of I would characterize it like that time felt like the sense of urgency was just so intense, and the decisiveness that emerged from that moment, was also just things just felt swift. We moved. We really, like, stepped up to that moment in a very, like, such an intentional way. There was yeah, I mean, when COVID hit, we had a clarity of purpose. The need was so immediate, it was so undeniable, and I think that all gave us permission just to act boldly, go. I have such a clear memory of moving $1 million in one afternoon and hand walking this check to UPS, even though it was shut down, and saying, "I need to get this $1 million to the statewide emergency medical services authority to move something really swiftly." We did not hesitate to act. There was uncertainty, of course. Everyone remembers the uncertainty. We didn't know what we didn't know about the disease, and how we were going to make longer term decisions. But it still felt like collectively everyone was willing to move and take risks in service of responding to that moment. And today things feel a little different. The uncertainty is definitely still present, but it feels more diffuse, and in some ways a little bit more, I hate to use the word paralyzing, because we're not standing still by any stretch of the imagination. We're navigating economic instability, questions about healthcare access and who will continue to have it, policy shifts that are coming, but we don't really know how to predict their impact yet. So what I feel to what's happening today is a little bit more caution. Instead of acting really quickly and swiftly, I feel like there's more scenario planning. There's a little more hesitation. There's a little bit more wait and see. Just like a flavor of just kind of, we got to check this out. We really don't know necessarily how to step up, and what we're really being called to do in some ways. So it's changed the pace and the posture. So I mean, to kind of sum it up, I think it feels more like quieter uncertainty. What we're systems are shifting in a way that may be less visible to us, and we're trying to really find that balance between taking risks but behaving responsibly for what is still uncertain in the coming months and years. So I think it's kind of testing us. It's testing our patience and our ability to take risks, and our courage and our judgment. I don't know. That's sort of how I would characterize the difference.
That was such a visual answer, Tanir, as you were speaking. All I could think was back to those dreams, or maybe they're nightmares, that I know I've had over the years, where I'm trying to run and I can't get anywhere. This idea that the urgency is just as great, and yet there's something that has got us stuck a little bit more, right? Being careful and cautious in how you're making those decisions. That's it's sticking with me a lot, that visual. Let's hang on that for a minute because I mentioned at the top that the research that we had done showed this really interesting duality that leaders are saying this is historic pressure we're under, and yet we still feel confident in our ability to move this mission forward. Would you say that that's the way you feel? You still feel confident in your ability to move it forward. It's just almost how you get from point A to point B is the question right now.
Yes, your listeners can't see me, maybe they can. Nodding my head very vigorously in response to the question. I think that sounds really understandable. It was very resonant. Yes. There's that tension between pressure and optimism, and that's how I sort of experience. So that's how I'm experiencing in this moment for sure. I think on the one hand, I have deep concerns about what's happening at the national level and how that will trickle down into our communities and into states and just local populations. So lots of concerns around that. The implications of HR1 and loss of healthcare access um, really terrifies me, and what it will do to safety net systems, which is, of course, where we operate now, and how safety net systems are always asked to step up in times when people lose more stable structures. And we can feel the weight of that in conversations across the field that we don't know what's coming, but we don't think it's going to be good. And then at the same time, I'm out in these meetings and I'm feeling really hopeful because I see progress being made and just examples of conversations that are happening and ideas that are manifesting. This our statewide organization is launching an equity framework that we were a huge part of, and we never would have seen that before. It's amazing work that's going to happen, and so that's an example of I'm hopeful of some groundwork that I'm seeing getting put into place. Um, just just many ideas that are taking shape and communities that are building to really respond to this moment makes me feel deeply hopeful. Um, so I do think we're going to see more equity-based conversations. I do think we're going to see more conversations about how we can support special populations in navigating this moment. Um, so it's both. I mean, I don't know how I can underscore what your sort of the nature of the question any more than I have. Being a leader now means holding both of those things. Deep concern, my, brow is furrowed about this broader context that we're operating in, but just watching so many people and communities really get creative and smart and dig in to try to create some change and some longer lasting systems change in that context. It's really hopeful.
Creative. I'm so glad you said that word because it's been a really important theme of the other interviews I've had with both foundation and nonprofit leaders. But there's this theme of the moment we're in requires us to reimagine. And sometimes reimagining can feel scary, and sometimes it can feel exciting to say the way we've always done this may not be the way that we're going to do it moving forward. And we've heard from several other folks on the show who have talked about very interesting collaborations between foundations and nonprofits that wouldn't have existed outside of the time that we're in. And so I'm curious if anything comes to mind, anything you're seeing that speaks to that kind of creative collaboration, problem solving inside your world right now.
Um, yeah, I do see that. I do feel like there's more energy to have uh convenings, discussions. People do want to come together. I think they do really want to ideate and to be in community with one another. I think I feel both of those things, and I'm watching. I'm just sort of rolling over examples of how many more requests we're getting for collaborations and convenings to occur. And it's another way I feel really optimistic and hopeful that more of that will happen, and just people being in community in and of itself is really meaningful at this time right now.
there are many nonprofits who are saying, we want to be closer in community to our foundation. And it sounds like you're already doing that. I mean, we know this about the CareStar Foundation, that you are, in fact, showing up in service of and with your community. It's a core part of how you all operate. Curious if there's anything that you think about in terms of how you do that, because you model it so well, that might be some interesting insights for other foundations who are thinking about, how do I get closer to my community? How do I listen better to my community in this time?
I think this is something that we're constantly struggling with and seek to do better. We're a really, really small team. So our ability to do that is, I think, the way that we're leaning in and showing up to that need to be in close connection with community is really having, we don't have a large number of grantees, and we are in deep relationship with those with whom we are. So in some ways, it's kind of a smaller scale, deep relationship um, type of approach. I know that there are so many foundations that are doing really, really innovative work around polling and listening sessions, and we have done some of that. We definitely have, and we will continue to do some of that. We produce reports on a regular basis. We survey our grantees on an annual basis. But I think a lot of it is just being constantly in community and listening and iterating together with our grantee communities.
All right. I mentioned at the top that you all have just recently completed a strategic plan. And by the time this comes out, that strategic plan will actually be live and public out in the world. So let's pause here, because, again, I'll make another connection back to the research, and then I'll turn it back to you. That I found it so interesting that most people that we interviewed said that they are making major changes to their grant making strategy. So that's on the foundation side, or their fundraising strategy on the nonprofit side. So the vast majority of people are making major strategic changes to how they operate. And a significant amount of them are operating without a strategic plan, because strategic planning feels too hard in this moment. For someone who has just gone through it, I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about what that process did for you all, for you and your board and your staff.
Yeah, I can appreciate all the aspects of what you're saying. I think for us, I would say long-term planning had is definitely felt harder. And you remember conversations we had several times, right? About, is it 3 years or is it 5 years? What can we really say? And kind of going back and forth on that. And I think for us, what the strategic planning process really brought us was a lot more clarity about the focus that we wanted to have, knowing that we cannot be all things to all people. We cannot meet the needs that, the vast, huge needs that are out there. We needed to really understand, okay, so if we could do one thing, what would the one thing be? And how can we name that one thing? And so that narrowing our focus was incredibly helpful. I think it's been really helpful for the staff, and I think it's been really helpful for the board to just understand, okay, we're all going to focus on just this one thing that we want to change about the EMS field. So as the environment is shifting, it is such a bright North Star, and it's already been incredibly helpful. So I think it just allows us, particularly the staff, to go through the day-to-day barrage of requests and need that are out there, and just remember, okay, you just said we were going to change this one thing, or just said we were going to change this one thing. And yet, and then I would sort of not necessarily contradict myself, but it's sort of a yes and to expand that the plan, I think what's so fantastic about our plan is it has really sharpened our focus and narrowed our North Star and clarified where we're heading. But it doesn't necessarily have all of, it's not rigid, I guess is what I was going to say. There is still room for some expansiveness and input into how we achieve the North Star. There's still a lot of space. And even in the short time that plan, ink is barely dry on the plan, but even still, just even in the last couple of weeks, I can see it beginning to take even a greater level of shape, and I can see the pathways to get there more clearly. So I think it's it's been great. We got the focus, we got the narrowing, we've got the sort of the pathway and the star, and all that is fantastic. And yet we still left ourselves some room to play with ideas and opportunities that are coming up from community members who are in conversation with us.
Tanir, I'm really glad that you said it and described it that way. A few weeks ago, we had Tonya Wellens, who's the CEO of the Greater Washington Community Foundation, and she became the CEO 30 days before COVID pandemic began. And then they were all um, obviously in crisis response mode for quite a long time. And they decided one of the first things they did was, well, let's create a 10-year plan because they said, we will get out of this. We will navigate through this and we're going to look beyond it. And it's what I felt in your work too, right? There's a lot that we can't control, but what I heard and felt from you and your team was, but there are also things that we can. We can stay really focused on the change we want to see in the world and then recognize that every year that path might change a bit on how we get there because of all that we can't control. But that if we've got that focus, we can be really impactful.
I think that's absolutely right. To me, I think, and that is why we sort of went through that. Is it 3 years or is it 5 years conversation? Because I think, particularly the board members who wanted to actually make it longer in the end, I think that the language of our North Star, right, eliminating racial disparities, is evergreen. There is no point at which eliminating racial disparities in care delivery in the EMS system will ever go away. That's something that we can hang our hats on for a long time. But again, as I said before, it still gives us the space to think about how we want to get there in any given moment. So that's what I really appreciate about it a lot.
And you mentioned earlier collaboration, the importance of that creative collaboration, that you can't do that alone, right? So it creates this really, your strategic plan creates an invitation to work with you all.
I certainly hope it does. I really, really do hope it does. And it's been interesting, I just having a handful of conversations so far about our new tighter focus. Having some conversations where people no longer see themselves in our plan, but a lot of conversations where we've watched people get really excited by and inspired by and create and think in different ways about this idea of like, what now we're talking about reducing, disparities in care. Yeah, I've been wanting to have this conversation for a long time. I'm really excited. Here's all the ideas I have about doing that. And so it's been really rewarding, also much more positively received in so many different arenas and places I didn't expect.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we somehow are already coming to the end. So I have time for one more question, but I'm going to try to sneak in a quick one first and then get to my last formal question. So at the top, I introduced some of the questions that you all asked yourself over the past year. And one of them was, what will it take to look back years from now and say, what we did changed something meaningful? And you've been talking about the one thing. We just want to do one thing. My question here is really about you because I admire you so much. When you, Tanir, look back 10 years from now, what you hope to be able to say about what you and your team did at the CareStar Foundation during this 2026 time of life?
Gosh, that is a great question. I think that, and I've said this to you throughout our strategic planning process that I think that the most valuable thing that we have done and can continue to do is not necessarily the resources that we have and the money that we give away, but is that the idea that we've created momentum throughout the state and inspired a statewide conversation about how and why we need to look at racial inequities in the EMS system. Just having the ability, and that's what resources give us, I'm super aware of that. Um, that there are so many people who want to jump into this conversation and have better ideas and better knowledge and are closer to the problem than we are. All of those things are true, but sometimes it does take a statewide organization that sits just outside the center to create that momentum and the spaces to talk about it and the resources that, yes, individual projects may be happening, but it's much bigger than individual projects. It's the idea I think we did embed this language into our plan at the end, that we could embed a culture within a system that outlives and outlasts all of us, that we take racial equity as a centerpiece, and it guides all of the decisions that happen within that system. So that, I think, is our ultimate goal. Or did we leave the system more in tuned with that racial inequality actually does exist in this part of the healthcare field? So I don't know if that was, but that's a lot about how I think our most meaningful impact could be.
All right. So then my last official question, Tanir, is what's giving you hope as you think about carrying those weights of navigating through uncertainty, but still feeling hopeful and positive that you will be able to advance, and I believe you will, advance that vision for the future. What's giving you hope as you just kind of look out into the horizon?
That's a tough question, Carrie. I think it is. Sometimes I'm exhausted by trying to get all over the state all of the time and meet all of the people who are doing such incredible work in our field. And then every time I get out there and go to a new meeting and shake someone's hand and hear their ideas about what they're up to, I am absolutely re-inspired to continue the work and to be present for people and to engage in those conversations, because I am really hopeful. There's a tremendous amount of energy to do the right thing and to do new things and to change the system for the better and to embrace what's good about it, but to also look for how I can be continuously improved. And so that does give me hope. Really being out with people in relationship, listening to ideas and supporting the ideas that are emerging makes me hopeful.
Well, Tanir, final thought from me is a thank you. I mentioned at the top, we had this wonderful opportunity to work with you and your board, and we have worked with many boards on strategic plans. And I will always say that there was something very, very special about working with you and your team because of the presence that every single staff and board member brought to that process. They were in it. They were deeply in that process with you. And you don't see that in every organization. The investment of care, the ability to be kind of courageous in tough discussions. And that doesn't happen without a leader like you. So you wouldn't say that about yourself, but I'm going to say it about you, that it was really a wonderful process to watch you lead and to be able to learn a little more from you today in this setting.
Thank you, Carrie. As you know, it was communicated to you throughout the process. The board absolutely loved working with you and your team, and I want to just underscore and echo. I think you're right that no one was phoning it in. We're all like deeply invested and totally present, and really invested in the outcomes. So thank you for that.
Well, we'll be watching your work. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll continue to cheer you on and support you.
That was my pleasure. Thanks, Carrie.
Take care. Yep, that's right. It is the second of our new segment called Research Briefs, which we are bringing you with our researcher in residence, Matt Price. Matt is the founder of Empath Insights, who helps all of us connect the dots between what we're learning on the show and what the latest research says on those same topics. And today we have a lot to dig into. So Matt, thanks for coming back.
Yeah, thanks so much, Carrie. This was I was able to listen to Tanir's interview, and it was just really, I thought, really powerful, really interesting. I especially appreciated how much she was passionate about racial health disparities and racial equity in the health field. And I think my first question was really, to what degree are people even aware of issues surrounding racial disparities in healthcare? It can really vary, because we do know that people in the U.S. Do believe that healthcare is, something akin to, it's your right to pursue it to the highest. There was a stat from the AAMC Center for Health and Justice in a survey they did in 2025. And said 75% of adults support everyone having a fair and just opportunity to attain their highest level of health. So we all take this as, the majority of us take this as something that's extremely important. But there's not always the same recognition of those racial disparities.
Yeah. Can I just pause you for one moment? Because it always begs the question, right? The opposite of that data. What is going on with the 25% of adults who do not support everyone having a fair and just opportunity? That worries me. But happy to see that 75%, the majority of Americans, do in fact support that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think to some degree, sometimes people are reacting to certain words that maybe they think are code for something else. Because I think you're probably right that at its core, it's probably closer to 80, 90, 100% when you kind of take out some of those buzzwords. So it's something that everyone thinks is a really important goal to strive for. With racial disparities, one thing that I found interesting was the Kaiser Family Foundation published a poll a couple years ago asking whether racism was a major problem, minor problem, not a problem in like 6 different areas. So like policing, education, politics. For healthcare specifically, you had about a third of everyone saying it's a major problem, racism in healthcare, 38% saying a minor problem. So that's significant in and of itself, but it was also the lowest of the 6 tested, right? So there was less overall recognition that this is a structure that has allowed racism to manifest in certain ways than it might be in policing or some other areas where maybe it's talked about more commonly.
That is really interesting. And I find it so surprising that there may not be recognition of inequity, but it's all through our own lens, our own experiences. We see what we experience. So tell me from your perspective, what's going on there and how does the public learn?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that with a lot of these topics that people aren't, that haven't been discussed in the same way, or maybe as commonly in every circle, communication really continues to be key, right? So, that AAMC poll that I referenced also showed about half of Americans being unfamiliar with the term health equity, more understood among younger Americans, among minorities, those with higher levels of education. But overall, it recognizes that there's some extra work that needs to be done with the concept to understand in the first place. I think the other thing is, okay, when you are asking folks, what does health inequity mean? Or racial disparities in health, I think underinsurance probably comes to mind first. Maybe that's the lowest hanging fruit. And we do know there are different insurance rates. Kaiser Family Foundation found 3/4 of white Americans having private insurance, but compared to 50% of Hispanic Americans, 53% of Black Americans, 40% of American Indian and Alaskan Natives. So that kind of might jump out to people first, but there's also all these barriers, as Tanir spoke to, and as a lot of folks know, that aren't covered really. And I was trying to dig around and find some data there. And the National Health Interview Survey really talked about things like lack of transportation, longer waiting times. There's also data on, what's the nature of the experience with a medical provider? Is it positive? Did they trust you? Did they misdiagnose you? Things like that. All of these things happening at higher levels. But it just might not be as obvious to everyone the way underinsurance is. And I think more education there is necessary.
Right. That's helpful. I find it so inspiring to hear from Tanir say things like racial equity is non-negotiable in EMS care, right? And I'd love to hear from you why it's so inspiring to have folks like Tanir working on this issue. Do you know how nonprofits are meeting this particular moment?
Yeah, it's interesting. We did the Insights on Purpose report that I know you've talked about a lot on your podcast, and I think there's a couple of data points in there that speak to that a little bit. One is we were actually looking at different types of nonprofits in the nonprofit section, right? So there were 5 nonprofits where there were enough where you could kind of have a robust sample size, and healthcare was one of them. So of those 5, we asked everyone, but of those 5, how optimistic are you about your ability to advance the mission over the next 5 years? And health nonprofits were the lowest there. They had the least optimism compared to, education, social services, et cetera. And only 19% of them strongly agreed that they had what they need to make an impact for the people who they serve, though about half of the universe said they somewhat agreed. But, the point there to me is they are, again, maybe needing help and more cover than a lot of other nonprofits. And that's what I found so interesting about, a foundation like CareStar coming in, because that was another finding in Insights on Purpose. A lot of these organizations need that kind of cover from someone who is a little more unafraid and maybe less on the front lines to promote some things that are very important, but that are sometimes under attack, like addressing racial equity.
Right. Right. Well, Matt, you have given us a lot to think about today. So thanks for packing this research brief into so much good data, making sense of it for us. And folks, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope you come back next episode to hear Matt's next research brief. And Matt, thanks again, as always, for being with us.
Yes, thank you.